Hello and welcome back to my channel. This video is about principles of costing, and today we're going to talk about manufacturing account. The manufacturing account shows the stages of the cost in producing the finished goods. These costs are the following. First is direct materials. This is the actual materials used in the production. Next is direct labor. This is the amount paid to workers who make the products. Next is manufacturing overheads. These are indirect costs like indirect materials, indirect labor, and other expenses. This includes labor costs for the factory supervisor or factory costs, which is rent, which will be covered in the later videos about the overhead absorption. Next is adjustment for work in progress or WIP. WIP are units that have been started but not yet completed as a finished product. And the last is adjustment for finished goods. These are the finished products or goods that are ready to sell. These costs are what we need in completing each stages of a manufacturing account. Now let's take a look at our example manufacturing account. We can see here the 5 stages or sections of the manufacturing account, which consist of these costs that I have just explained earlier. The direct materials are needed to get the direct materials used. The direct labor is needed to get the direct cost. The manufacturing overheads are needed to get the manufacturing cost. The adjustment for WIP is needed to get the cost of goods manufactured, and the adjustment for finished goods is needed to get the cost of goods sold. I know it's a long process and we need to memorize it, but later I will share to you how I remember them, hopefully to make it a little bit easier. However, before that, let's go through each sections one by one because it's important to understand them before memorizing them. The first stage is the direct materials used. The direct materials used is the opening inventory plus the purchase of raw materials minus the closing inventory. The opening inventory of raw materials are the raw materials already in stock at the beginning of the period. We then add the purchases of raw materials that was made during the period. These combined raw materials represent the total raw materials available for use in the production. However, not all of these materials will necessarily be used by the end of the period. There will most likely be leftover of raw materials, which form the closing inventory. So we subtract the closing inventory to determine the actual direct materials used during the period. Next stage is direct cost. Direct cost is the direct materials used plus the direct labor. Direct labor is just the amount paid to the workers, so obviously there is no opening and closing inventory here. You may notice that from the subtotal of the previous stage, we added another cost to get the subtotal of the next stage, and that will happen to the following stages as well, so it's important that each subtotals are correct. Next stage is the manufacturing cost. The manufacturing cost is the direct cost plus the manufacturing overheads. The manufacturing overheads, as I mentioned earlier, could be the labor of the factory supervisor or the factory rent, etc. So obviously there is no opening and closing inventory as well. Again, from the subtotal of the previous stage, which is the direct cost, we added a new cost, which is manufacturing overheads, to get the subtotal of this stage, which is the manufacturing cost. The next stage is the cost of goods manufactured. The cost of goods manufactured is the cost of the finished product. To get this, it's the manufacturing cost plus opening inventory of WIP minus closing inventory of WIP. The opening inventory of WIP are the units or parts of the products left over from the previous period. These are unfinished products that are ready to be assembled. We add this to the manufacturing cost and the total will be processed into a finished product for the period. However, not all of this will necessarily be used by the end of the period. There would be leftovers, and these are the closing inventory of WIP. We subtract this amount to determine the cost of goods manufactured or the cost of the finished products ready for sale. Next, the final stage is to get the cost of goods sold. The cost of goods sold are the finished products sold for the period. To get this, the cost of goods manufactured plus opening inventory of finished goods minus closing inventory of finished goods. We add it to the cost of goods manufactured, representing the total goods available for sale during the period. However, not all of this will necessarily be sold by the end of the period. There would be leftovers, and these are the closing inventory of finished goods. We subtract this amount to determine the cost of goods sold for the period. Now that we understand the manufacturing account, let's now try to memorize them. To share to you how I memorized them, I had to remember the first letter of the names of each of these subtotals. We have D, D, M, C, C, and most of them have cost in them, except for the first one. 3 of them have the opening and closing inventory, which is the first and the last 2. For these 2 that don't have the opening and closing inventory, we will only insert one cost, which is easy to remember because they start on the same word. And the last thing that we need to remember is the first one is special because it needs 3 items to calculate it. Now let's try to create the manufacturing account remembering these 4 things. First, the subtotals start from DDMCC, and we have to allot some spaces because we know that we have to insert items above them. Second, 3 of them have opening and closing inventory, which are the first and the last 2. Third, these 2 don't have the opening and closing inventory, so we will insert only one cost for each of them and they start with the same word. So let's write D and M for now and we will find that out later. And last, the first one is special because it has 3 items in it. Now that we understand the manufacturing account, it will be easier to identify and arrange these subtotals in order. These 2 D's here stand for direct. M is for manufacturing. And these 2 C's stand for costs. The very first thing that we need in manufacturing are the raw materials. So this first subtotal is direct materials used. And this are opening and closing inventory of raw materials. The next stage is direct cost because, as I have said earlier, all of them have cost in it except for the first one. So this is direct costs. This D here stands for direct as well, and this is the only item we need to get the direct cost, which is easy to remember because it has no opening and closing inventory. So this is the direct labor. So remember, to get the direct cost, you need the direct materials and the direct labor. The next stage has cost in it as well, so it is manufacturing cost. This is the only item that we need to get the manufacturing cost, which of course stands for manufacturing as well. And no opening and closing inventory in this stage, so this is manufacturing overheads. Then we can just delete the spaces that we don't need. The next stages both start from costs, and it's either cost of goods manufactured or cost of goods sold. They both have goods in them, but of course, goods manufactured comes first before being sold. So this is cost of goods manufactured, and this is cost of goods sold. So to get the cost of goods manufactured, we need the opening and closing inventory of WIP. And to get the cost of goods sold, we need the opening and closing inventory of finished goods. So we can see we have three kinds of inventory, which is in the first and the last two stages, the opening and closing inventory of raw materials, WIP, and finished goods. Of course, the very first is the raw materials, then the WIP, and the last is the finished goods. And the last thing to remember is that the first one is special because it needs three items. So this item here stands for purchases. And this should go underneath the opening inventory. So we have here an example of manufacturing account to practice what we have learned so far. Now that we know the correct order, we can now reorder the manufacturing account. Don't forget to double check that each subtotal amounts are correct, and remember that the closing inventory should be deducted. And that's it for this video. I hope you find it useful. If you want to watch more videos like this, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.